The top-ranked player in 2026, USC quarterback commit Julian Lewis, taking a trip to Ohio State over the weekend. And that is all I will say on the matter, because we are bringing in someone who knows much more about this. Our friend Bill Kurelic of bucknuts.com is joining the program. And Bill, getting Lewis on campus while he's committed to the Trojans is a big deal. So what did he tell you about his visit to the shoe?
Well, Emily, it really was a big deal. I mean, as you said, he's the number one player in the country in the class of 2026. And he had a game the night before. He got up early on Saturday morning then and had a flight to Ohio, to Columbus. And he said that he was really tired, but he said the trip was well worth it. He got a chance to see the Buckeyes play in person, got a feel for the program, more of a feel for the program, got to spend some time talking with Ryan Day, who he was very impressed with, and Corey Dennis, so the quarterback's coach at Ohio State. So he said, it was just a really worthwhile trip for him to get to Ohio State, and certainly the Ohio State staff very happy he made it.
Those Ohio State versus USC versus Georgia quarterback battles have been really intriguing and fascinating to monitor. Bill, another player that made it out to Ohio State this past weekend was Dorian Brew. He's the number 3 rated corner in that 2025 class. It was his 3rd time that he's been inside the shoe. What is the word on the Buckeyes and their chances after this most recent stop?
Well, Dorian is originally from Texas, but he spent a good portion of his life also living in Ohio. But then he moved back to Texas in October, and he's at Conroe High School. He'll finish his high school career next season at Conroe. But with his background of being in Ohio and Texas, both, I think the I guess you'd say the leaders in the clubhouse might be the Texas schools and Ohio State. He's been to Ohio State, as you mentioned, Blair, 3 times for games this season. He saw 2 games at Ohio State in September before he moved back to Texas, and then this past weekend. He has been to Texas A&M a number of times as well, and that was maybe his favorite school growing up. So, it really could be an interesting battle between Ohio State, Texas A&M, and there's a couple other schools in the mix certainly too. Certainly Texas is going to be in the mix, and he's probably going to be at the Michigan-Ohio State game in Ann Arbor this weekend. But I think it's pretty safe to say right now I don't think any Ohio State trails anyone for Dorian Brew at this point.
Always hard to pull some of those prospects away from their home state schools. Let's talk about another 2025 target. Defensive lineman Christopher Burgess Jr. making the trip to Columbus this weekend. Now, he's set to announce his decision at the All-American Bowl on January 6th. So how should Buckeye fans feel ahead of this decision?
Well, Emily, I think they should feel more encouraged now that he's been to Ohio State for a game. He had made 2 visits to Ohio State in the summer, one in June and one in July. And he had made game day visits to schools like Notre Dame and Michigan, who he is highly considering, but he'd never been to a game at Ohio State. He made it to Ohio State's game this past weekend, came away very impressed, and I think it's going to be a really tough decision for him. I think Notre Dame going into this past weekend probably had a slight edge for him, but I think Ohio State made up some ground, and I think it's going to be a tough decision. I think Ohio State has a legitimate shot to get Chris Burgess, and he is a absolute top of the board defensive edge guy for Ohio State.
It's flip season in the world of recruiting, Bill. Who are some 2024 prospects that the Buckeyes are in on with a month to go until signing day?
Well, Blair, at the top of the list is Amaris Williams. He's a defensive end out of North Carolina. He's currently committed to Florida. He made an official visit to Ohio State, and he also recently made a trip back to Ohio State for an unofficial visit. So if you're a Buckeye fan, that's encouraging. He is, though, at this point, still committed to Florida. But I like the Buckeyes' chances to pull off a flip there. In fact, I've got Amaris Williams' crystal ball to Ohio State at this point. Another one that the Buckeyes would like to flip that they have a legitimate shot at is Gabe Van Sickle. He's an offensive lineman that is currently committed to Northwestern, and he's trying to make a final decision between staying with Northwestern or flipping to Ohio State. Chance Robinson's a wide receiver from Florida that's committed to Miami. I think in that case, I think he will end up staying with his Miami commitment. But there's 1 or 2 other guys to keep an eye on. Coy Parrish, he is a safety from Minnesota that's committed to Minnesota. that is planning to make a visit to Ohio State in December. And then there's Nick Rodriguez, a linebacker committed to Missouri, who also recently made an unofficial visit back to Ohio State after making an official visit with the Buckeyes in June.
Speaking of flips, it would not be an Ohio State segment unless I asked about the top prospect in this current class, Jeremiah Smith. He is, of course, still committed to the Buckeyes, but he just cannot stay away from Florida State. He plans to go visit them one more time before signing day. So I've got to ask, how worried should Ohio State be about a possible flip here?
Yeah, he has made it an interesting recruiting journey. He's been committed to Ohio State for a long time, but he has taken a lot of visits. And Emily, as you mentioned, Florida State is currently the hot topic when it comes to possibly flipping for Jeremiah Smith. But, I think basically that as long as Ohio State, Ryan Day is at Ohio State, and Brian Hartline remains at Ohio State, the wide receiver coach and the offensive coordinator. I think the Buckeyes are in good shape as long as those two remain at Ohio State. Now, certainly, you would prefer he does not continue to take visits, but I think he will get back to Florida State. He has said he plans to, so you take his word at it. But I think it'll be a tough pull for Florida State to flip him. Not impossible necessarily, but again, as long as Hartline and Day are Ohio State, I like the Buckeyes' chances there.
And he has been really transparent, right, on social media, saying, I'm going to go to this place, I'm going to go to that place. He'll send out emojis, and it's been a really interesting part of his recruitment because he's been open about going to some of these schools, going on some visits, but staying firm with that commitment to Ohio State. The Buckeyes, meanwhile, hit the road. They're going to Ann Arbor for a humongous matchup against Michigan. And these two schools, Bill, usually battle for the same recruits. How big is the game from a recruiting standpoint?
Well, it's big, certainly. I always say that recruits almost never choose their school on the basis of one game, but they can be very impressed on the basis of that one game for sure. And if Ohio State can go up there and get the win in Ann Arbor, I think that it will really help the Buckeyes recruiting with the class of 2025 because there's going to be a lot of great players, especially from the class of 2025 at that game. And we've already talked about two of them. Chris Burgess is going to be at that game, and Dorian Brew is going to be at that game. And that's two of the top Ohio State and Michigan.
Well, Bill, they may not pick a school based on a game, but perhaps the game. Thank you so much for joining us. Check out bucknuts.com for all things Ohio State. The Buckeyes currently, they're the second-ranked class in the nation, and as we just talked about, it is the game week, so make sure that you are following along at bucknuts.com.